Well, Assistant Treasurer Josh Frydenberg is part of the government's economic team that's been out selling the budget to voters and business today. He was also apparently the brains behind the so-called Netflix tax, which will see GST charge on digital downloads from overseas company. He joins us now in Parliament House. Thanks for being there.
Nice to be with you, Tony.
Now, has your government's economic team all turned into born-again Keynesians?
Absolutely not, because under this budget, which is a very strong budget, we are cutting taxes. We have cut the deficit from 48 billion that we inherited to 35 billion next year to 7 billion in just 3 years' time. And we've cut spending from 3.6% annual growth that we inherited under Labor to just 1.5% today.
Let's look at the Keynesian side of it. This budget seems to have economic stimulus as its main philosophy. 1 year ago, it was a budget emergency and austerity. Now it's spend, spend, spend. So apart from the public backlash against last year's budget, what happened? What changed?
Well, let's put on the record the facts here, which is 75% of our budgetary measures did go through the Parliament, and the intergenerational report, which was issued by the Treasurer, actually said that on our debt trajectory going forward, as a result of our legislated, not our proposed measures, our legislated measures, that debt trajectory had been halved. So that's a very significant achievement. You're right that some of the measures, like the Medicare co-payment and the indexation to the pension, we have now dropped because we couldn't get the support in the Senate. But we are now looking for other initiatives and other savings. At the same time, we've invested in things that really count, Tony, like childcare and like small business.
Okay, I've let you make that little preliminary speech, but what actually changed from austerity to spend, spend, spend? What changed?
Well, I think we did a lot of the heavy lifting in our first budget, and we were successful getting 75% of the measures through. Now, at the same time, we have to be very pragmatic and realistic about what legislation can get the support out of 6 of the 8 senators in the Senate, and that's why this time round I think you'll see more support for more of our measures from this year's budget.
Okay, but on the stimulus measures in particular, Labor put in place big stimulus measures to keep us out of a GFC. Do you, or does the government in fact know something that the public doesn't know? Were we headed for recession? Is that why we need such big stimulus measures?
No, we're not heading for recession.
Were we headed for recession? Was that your fear?
No, we weren't heading for recession. It's quite clear from the Reserve Bank and the fact that they have reduced interest rates to the lowest levels on record at 2%, that they were trying to fill the excess capacity in the Australian economy. So we wanted fiscal policy and monetary policy to work hand in glove. So we have reinvested in key areas like small business. Now, 96% of Australian small businesses actually have a turnover under $2 million, and both incorporated and unincorporated small businesses will be hugely benefited by last night's announcements around the accelerated depreciation as well as the tax cuts.
Okay, let's look at that one. Start with that one, the accelerated depreciation, the asset write-offs. It's totally uncapped, is that right?
It's $20,000, and in terms of how many people take it up, that's right. We hope more take it up than even we've predicted.
And how often they take it up, that's also uncapped, isn't it? I mean, you could have multiple $20,000 purchases.
Yeah, but obviously the key here is that it's invested in productivity-linked purchases, and that's why we believe the spin-off for the rest of the economy will be very positive.
Well, that's as may be, but the Finance Minister says this is a tax cut. So when governments do tax cuts, they usually know what the tax cut's going to cost the revenue, the budget revenue. What's this one going to cost? Do you have any idea at all?
Well, the total package for both small business and for jobs was $5.5 billion. That's the envelope. That's what we're predicting. But you have to understand that if more people go out and buy a ute for their business in the agriculture sector, or more people go and buy a fridge or equipment for their local restaurant, then this will actually have a positive spin-off in other parts of the economy. It will create jobs for those people who manufacture that equipment.
Yeah, and it may well do that. But let's just look. Let's do some theoretical sums, if you like. We take the example that's in your own budget document. Sam's company goes out and buys a new rack oven for $17,000. His company will then get back $4,900, nearly $5,000 on his tax. That's correct, isn't it?
Well, he's going to benefit, of course, because he can write off that full amount in the first year, where otherwise he would have had to write it off over multiple years.
That's right. But in that year, the government has to give him back nearly $5,000.
Well, it's actually coming off his profits and his tax payable.
But it's revenue the government would otherwise have got that you would have expected to get, and now you've got to give it back. So that's that's $5,000 per person, correct?
Well, it's revenue. It's revenue that is foregone, but at the same time, maybe that purchase wouldn't have taken place. And one other good example we've given an instant asset write-off, if you like, is around for agriculture for new fences. Previously, if a farmer had put in a $25,000 fence, he would have had to write it off over 30 years. Now he can write it all off in 1 year.
Yeah, sure. So how many small businesses, we'll stick with the Sam case, how many small businesses are there like Sam's? How many in the country?
Well, you know, there's over 2 million small businesses, and they're employing 4.5 million people.
Okay,
so
well, all I want is the number. So if every one of those 2 million did what Sam did, that's $10 billion you've written off in your tax, isn't it?
No, look, you can try those sort of games tonight, Tony.
That's not a game. This is mathematics. Yeah, this is simple economics, really, isn't it? If every one of them did what Sam did, that's how much it would cost in foregone revenue.
And the revenue that would come in from company tax from the company that they just had purchased off would be even higher. The income tax that would come from the small business expanding by employing more people. I mean, these mathematical equations are done by Treasury, looking at the best estimates on the information that they have. We're very proud, Tony, of this particular measure. But they don't actually
have any information because they don't know how many people are going to take this up.
No, but governments have...
But if every one of those 2 million took it up, where would that actually leave you if you didn't get the multiplier effect through the economy that you're talking about?
But, Tony, they do these equations. For example, right now, the accelerated depreciation is at $1,000. We're putting it up to $20,000. So the same data that they did the estimates for on $1,000, they extrapolated to do it for $20,000. I mean, the point here is that small business...
The real point here is everybody knows how much it's actually going to cost revenue, isn't that right? Well, could it cost billions of dollars in foregone revenue?
Look, we think we've got the numbers right.
But what are the numbers?
Well, as I said to you, it's $5.5 billion is the small business and jobs package.
I'm talking about this uncapped part of it where you don't know the answer.
Well, we're very confident that all these sums add up, but more importantly, the fact that the Labor Party has come out tonight and supported this small business measure, and you've heard from Cosboa and Peter Strong and many other representatives across the economy that this is a good initiative. The fact that the economists from both Westpac and the NAB have come out and said the government's forecasts are credible, and that our estimates of economic growth going forward are credible. And if you look at, for example, where we have projected the iron ore price at just $48, when currently it's trading at $58, you could argue we're being incredibly conservative when it comes to our revenue forecast.
Okay, but it's true to say you're taking a risk to try and stimulate the economy, isn't that correct?
I think the risk is all on the upside, Tony.
Okay, let's go to another big unanswered question. Supposedly you're going to raise tax revenue from the so-called dirty 30, the multinationals, who haven't been paying virtually any tax at all in Australia and have worked out schemes to avoid doing that. Can you even give us a rough estimate of the amount of tax you might be able to raise now that you've targeted those companies?
Well, you're right that we are going to strengthen the anti-avoidance provisions in Part 4A of the Tax Act, and the whole purpose is to deal with artificial or contrived taxation arrangements where governments book revenue overseas and don't end up paying their fair share of tax. Now, we haven't put a figure on that because we didn't want to make the same mistake that the Labor Party made with their mining tax when they projected billions of dollars of revenue, made expenditures in line with those projections, and the revenue never actually came in.
Okay, but I'm just going to bring you up, we're running out of time, but you told this program a short time ago that billions of dollars were being more or less prevented from coming into the Australian taxation system that should be because of profit shifting by these multinational companies. Can we expect to get billions of dollars in taxation that's being kept from the Australian taxation system back into it?
Well, look, the expectation is that the ATO will run these processes according to the law. They've been embedded in a number of these companies. They've come to understand how these arrangements work. The Treasurer has
but there are billions missing. You've already said that.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
Both the Treasurer and I have talked about billions, and I must say, to point...
Can you get billions back? That's the real key question everyone wants to know the answer to.
Well, let's just see how it plays out. But it's been the Treasurer who, I dare say it, not me, who's been leading this charge through the OECD and the G20 to get a much stronger position on the anti-avoidance provisions in our Tax Act, as well as on the GST online revenue.
Okay, finally, your colleague Senator Arthur Sinodinos, you would have just seen him earlier, saying the language used by senior government ministers about women who've allegedly been double-dipping on parental leave schemes has been unfortunate, particularly the notion that they've been rorting the system or anything appearing to be fraudulent. Would you agree with Arthur Sinodinos?
Well, what I'd say is this is an entitlement which people can get under the law. They can access both their employer scheme and they can also access the government's 18-week minimum wage scheme.
So very clearly, if that's the case, could you really honestly call it a rort?
Well, I would just say this is an entitlement we want to end, and we think it's fairer for the taxpayer if people who are accessing the paid parental leave scheme just access the better scheme, whether it's the more highly paid employer scheme or whether it's the government scheme.
Okay, but you've seen the reaction from so many women about the notion that they've been accused effectively of fraud. I mean, are you uncomfortable with the way in which the language was handled around this issue? Because one of those messaging things, and Tony Abbott can hardly afford to lose women voters.
Well, it's actually verbling our ministers to say that they use fraud, because none of you used that word.
No, I said tantamount to fraud, because double dipping and rorting is pretty much the same thing, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's just saying you've got access to two schemes, which is double dipping, which is a fact. But this is
what about rorting?
This is an entitlement we want to end, and my argument, Tony, is it's fairer on the taxpayer, particularly in the budget context that we have. And tomorrow night we're going to hear from the Leader of the Opposition just how he's going to find savings, because so far he's just got tax measures.
And finally, and I know you're only giving me a brief answer on this anyway, is there enough in this budget, if it were to be an early election, to encourage voters to think again?
We have no plans to go to an early election. And
at this time?
And the fact that you've just asked me that question just shows you how well this budget is being received.
Josh Frydenberg, we'll have to leave you there. Thanks very much for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Tony.